What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan, and today is an episode of The Social Report. And if you're new here, what The Social Report is a monthly podcast where I sit down with a couple members of the team from Trufan and we discuss some of the most interesting social media and influencer marketing news from the last 30 days. Today on the podcast, we are joined, as always, by Scott Birdie, the CGO at Trufan. And today we have a new special guest, Karen O'Brien, CMO from Trufan, is here as well today. I want to welcome you both to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you as always, Jacob.
So the first story that I want to talk about, which is one that's kind of hit my radar a couple times over the last month, is TikTokers starting their own podcasts. And obviously, like some of the big creators on there, like the Charli D'Amelio and her sister and Addison Rae, they both have their own podcasts. But two that really caught my eye this last month were a couple members of the Sway House starting podcasts, but they started them with people completely out of their realm in terms of who you'd think they collaborate with. So the first one being a podcast called BFFs, which is by Josh Richards from the Sway House, but he did it in conjunction with Dave Portnoy, the CEO of Barstool Sports, and that one's just kind of an interview show where they interview different people. And the other one that was interesting was one called Capital University, which is with Bryce Hall from the Sway House, alongside Anthony Pompliano, who works for Morgan Creek Capital. He's a big crypto investor, and it's the two of them sitting down, and sometimes they bring on a guest, and the whole purpose of the podcast is educating Bryce how to better use his money so he doesn't go bankrupt like many other influencers. And these two caught my eye for a couple of reasons. I mean, like obviously just the merging of two completely different worlds into one podcast stood out to me. But I took the time and I listened. I haven't listened to the Capital University one yet, but I have listened to the first episode of the BFFs one. And what was most interesting to me was the fact that these TikTokers are probably a lot more calculated than people give them credit for. Like a lot of people watch the dancing or the shirtless dancing and just think like that's easy to do. But there's a lot more thought behind what they're doing. And I think that part of the reason is now there's a history and a precedent for people who become famous on the internet versus you flash back to like the late 2010s, even or the late 2000s, the early 2010s, like it was still so new that no one really knew what was happening when they went viral. But now like they can look back and see all the influencers who have had successful careers after blowing up the internet, those who haven't, and they're able to learn from them. So they have more than just 15 minutes of fame. That was kind of my big takeaway, is just how calculated they are and the fact that they're learning from the lessons of previous influencers. But my question for you two is, why do you think that all the TikTokers are jumping to podcasting? Why not other platforms? Why are they prioritizing podcasting? It seems all of a sudden with a lot of them jumping in to podcasting in a short period of time.
I mean, my perspective is that they're wanting to continue their voice outside of the TikTok platform, and that, you know, they have a lot to say. And I think podcasting gives them a really credible, easily monetizable platform to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think that's, typically looking at podcasting as more of a platform per se. It's just yet another channel to generate some form of trust. And I think also give listeners or people who are probably viewing a lot of their TikTok content a slightly different perspective on who they are, what sorts of, potentially challenges, interests, whatever it may be that they have. You were just talking about the podcast where they take a slightly different angle and start to speak about challenges with your money as an influencer, and kind of watching over that particular use case as an example of like what to do and what not to do. Definitely something that a lot of other people who are going through similar experiences can relate to and learn from. So it's like valuable content, right? But you're also giving that person a chance to explain a little bit more about like how their life is changing and what's going on day to day than they might normally do on like their bread and butter TikTok account if they've built their presence on TikTok, right? Because you need to kind of create and stay, I think, relevant with the times as much as certain things are authentic and unique to their own pages. So like you said, like their TikTok page has to be a more like dialed in point of content. And certainly they can learn from other creators now, but like if you actually had an interest in doing this creation thing professionally on TikTok and you weren't actually learning from previous, creators on Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is. Like you go back to MySpace, that would be silly. So obviously the ones who are taking it a little more seriously, probably looking for additional channels and, just trying to build alternative forms of trust and communication with their audience.
Mm-hmm. And another thing too that they talked about on those podcasts, and I've just kind of following these stories has come up, is just they're diversifying more than just from platforms, but with their money. Like they're looking to make investments into companies. I know Bryce and Josh have started their own energy drink, and I believe they have a clothing line as well. And they're doing like $1 million a quarter or something like that. So they're starting to diversify not only where they put their content, but where they make their money as well. And we're just seeing creators become the new brands more and more every single day.
And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think as influencer marketing keeps evolving, and influencers gain so much true influence over consumers, why not create their own merch, they've started with merch, but their own collaborations and maybe even their own product lines. Why not?
Mm-hmm. 100%. They own all the upside, right? Like because if companies keep coming to them to promote their product, clearly their promotion's working. So why not, instead of taking the promotional dollars, make the money on the products instead?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'll just take this into this other area that I wanted to chat about a little bit, which is holiday, promotion and shopping coming up. Obviously, we're a couple months now, I guess, out from Christmas. This is the 26th when we're recording this right now, so about 2 months exactly, almost, or 27th. But either way, looking at this from like an angle of, hey, these are people who are getting in front of millions of people a day, potentially, or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and have built, I mean, TikTok, is one of those areas where if they're following you, which potentially a lot of these viewers may not be, but if they are, there's probably some level of trust that the creator has built with that audience member, over that short period of time when TikTok's blown up. And so TikTok, as a primary, I'd say, channel for influencer marketing leading up to the holidays, is a great place to build trust with consumers if you're a brand out there. But taking that one step further, if you have either people around you, it could be maybe an agency, or just like, a bit of a marketing background and the interest in creating your own brand and owning more of your data, your output, starting now and doing that could be another great route. But I think like you'll see probably most of the people still trending towards sharing gifts for different brands that are more mainstream, than probably making their own, just due to the fact that it takes a little bit more effort out there. But what sorts of channels do you guys think are going to be the most relevant come this holiday? And are there any strategies that stand out to you as things that influencers or brands should be doing with influencers?
I don't know if either of you saw this today, but Shopify announced a partnership with TikTok itself to allow brands to sell on the merchants to sell on in the app. I don't know if you saw that, so we could see
No,
that
I
as a
didn't see that.
potential
That's
new,
amazing.
yeah, as a new stream for people to promoting and selling products this holiday season.
That's a huge partnership. I was just going to say, Scott, that I've seen definitely a trend over the last few months, and I think it's only going to accelerate into holiday, of, consumers are spending more time on other channels other than just Facebook channels, right? And marketers are starting to market more off of the more traditional social channels. I think part of it has to do with election media, and then just they're trying to go where consumers are, and consumers are sort of trying out other channels that they maybe haven't spent as much time on before, TikTok being one of them. But we're seeing massive upticks in use of Pinterest, Snap, and a few other channels. So I think we're seeing that trend now. I think it's going to continue into holiday, and if it turns out to be financially viable for influencers and for brands, I think you'll see more of it. So, but TikTok, I think in particular, you're going to see a lot of brands start to leverage that platform in a way they haven't. And if you look at, the rise of influencers on it, there's been a window where you can easily build millions of followers relatively easily compared to Instagram or other channels that are now might be a little more mature.
Karen, do you think that it has to do a little bit with the like I mean, not that every product or service requires like a ton of instructions, but with, technology and just more advanced products with different changes and things needing to be a little bit clearer to the everyday consumer, coming out more and more often, like, would you attribute TikTok as a great channel for that and using influencer marketing as the channel? And because of that explanation that's needed oftentimes, or the like education that we need more and more?
I think it's a couple things. I think it's super easy for consumers to use. I think it's easy for influencers to use. And so I think if you look at the example, and we'd be kind of, amiss to not mention the viral video from Nathan Apodaca, aka 420 Dogface, 208 or whatever his name is, that had the viral video on the skateboarding, chilling out, drinking cranberry juice. I mean, the reason that was so viral, one, it was just easy to do. It was super authentic. He grabs his phone or what have you, and just, records a chill moment. And people really dug it. But the reason that it went so viral was because it invited also participation. And it also struck a cultural moment with people. A lot of people are feeling really, sort of isolated and anxious right now. To see something like that, it was so chill and so positive and so happy, really resonated with people, but it enabled them to participate. You saw a lot of, sort of copycat videos or reaction videos from it. And that's really what has helped. I think the other thing that TikTok did really well, that if you look at platforms like Quibi that didn't succeed, I think what TikTok did well is they made themselves extensible into other social networks. You can easily publish your TikTok videos into the other platforms. But I think that creates a massive, massive advantage.
And I think another thing too, in terms of TikTok and promoting products, is you can really showcase a product with a TikTok. Like, I know my girlfriend, a big side of TikTok she's into is like Amazon finds and how people use these different Amazon finds. And she just loves watching people actually just use and showcase the products that they're finding on Amazon. So TikTok's a great platform for showcasing how your unique product works.
Yeah, there's a lot of sellers I'm finding on TikTok that I didn't expect to see that, like either small business creators or just, basically people who are selling on eBay, Amazon, Etsy. They may or may not be making the products, but they're sellers. I didn't expect that community to be on TikTok, but there's a lot of them, to your point.
Yeah. And I think brands can be so creative with the ways that they start to leverage all these, super creatives that are out there creating this content day to day. I would imagine that a lot of times when people are getting pitched from TikTok on certain brand campaigns, they're hearing some of the most like outlandish ideas from these brands that they never thought they'd hear, just purely because of the inspiration that these brands can get by like going on to TikTok for 20 to 30 minutes. You know what I mean? That there's so much type of content that hasn't been made yet on TikTok. So like there's such an opportunity to still stand out, it seems like.
Yeah, and I think another thing that I think TikTok did really well that, you're seeing it handle a little bit better now with Facebook Reels, but, music being integrated so easily into the platform. Now, that isn't to say they won't have issues, and there's already been some questioning around licensing, but, TikTok's done a very good job of making that accessible to creators. Like, I don't think that the, skateboarder and cranberry juice video from Nathan Apodaca would be as appealing if it didn't have the Fleetwood Mac song behind it.
100%. Yeah. Would have lost half the appeal.
But on that note, Karen, how do you think Ocean Spray handled that situation? Because like that wasn't their campaign, of course, but they had to react to this extremely viral moment that they were a part of.
I think it was just so positively handled. Was they treated that as a brand moment that they were going to elevate, and I think it's something that not enough brands do, because that kind of content exists out there. And do brands actually listen, and do brands embrace it? Not always, not as much as they could be. I thought they did a great job of not only I'm sure a lot of our people listening know that they actually purchased a truck and really kind of rewarded him for all of the exposure that their product got. But also their executive actually did a copycat video and really honored him as a customer. So I think, and people loved it. I mean, it was everywhere. right? I think it was last time I looked at it, it was like 25 million views or something crazy. It's probably well beyond that. But I think the brand actually did a perfect job of elevating.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the song somehow reached, it was like number 2 maybe on, I don't know if it was Spotify or Apple Music or something like that, but like it was just like crazy revival status after days of this video coming out. And I love the guy's videos since. Like I've seen a couple of interviews with him explaining the moment and stuff. He has his daughter, like they live in a little trailer there. Um, he's so humble. Like it doesn't, it looks like the same thing is just going to take place tomorrow, and he'll pop out of the car and just cruise down the street. Same thing, same day.
And I love that Mick Fleetwood and Stevie Nicks responded to it, right? The actual artists.
Yeah.
And to your point, there was a surge of the music being streamed and purchased. So that's amazing.
Yeah, they should take him on tour.
I'm curious to ask both of you, do you think there's a way that brands can incentivize these moments? Because I think part of the magic of this moment is the fact that it wasn't a sponsored campaign. It was just a customer doing it of their own fruition. So is there a way brands can kind of try and manufacture these types of moments with their consumers?
I don't know if there's anything like pure authenticity, like it's a hard thing to define, but when you've struck that chord, like that video really struck that chord. I don't know if had Ocean Spray done the Doritos thing and maybe said like, hey, TikTok, we're looking for Ocean Spray lovers to get in, like just send us your content or whatever. You'll have a chance to be featured, win X amount of money, whatever, XYZ. Like as soon as there's some form of incentives in place or something that's driving people to make these moments, like, truly create the moments rather than like just let them happen as a moment, which I think was more so in the case of like what happened with Ocean Spray, then I'm really not sure if you get that same quality of output. Karen, what's your view on this? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like brands, we've seen some really bad brand marketing trying to manufacture that kind of engagement. I think brands are much better to respond to culture and to respond to customers and really show that they're listening. I mean, the reason that, Ocean Spray was able to respond to this was that they were listening. They were actually listening for this kind of engagement with customers. And then they were ready to respond to it. And I think that's far more powerful because it shows that you're honoring and elevating your customer to a level that is in alignment with the brand. I think when you try to create it too much, it doesn't always go well. Now, having said that, should brands do product launches and engagement with consumers? Absolutely. But they're probably not going to get it to this level.
Yeah, actually, you bring up a really good point there. You can always plant the seed with something, and product there's obviously tons and tons of brands out there and businesses that are now focused on influencer marketing. I think there was a recent study that was done that showed, an increase of about 73% spend for influencer marketing. But thinking about the strategy and how to get the most out of it, both in the short term, but also in the long term, you plant seeds for that type of stuff by one, having very solid foundational values as a brand, I think, and speaking those values through the different channels that you have where you're promoting organic content and things like that, but also through the stories that you tell as a brand, your marketing, and everything that you're doing. Um, and by doing so, and then I maybe taking that a step further, if you're looking to create a bit more of that wave or potential virality through, micro and let's call it what it is, nano influencer marketing, like it's just through the process of virality and people feeling engaged, then you have to put the things out there. So, like, whether it's product giveaways and really searching for people that you feel are aligned with your product, maybe have even bought the product before, but have a strong social presence and tend to speak about, like, the similar types of values that you represent as a brand. Like, I think that's where it comes down to, like, how far ahead are you thinking as a brand? And Karen once taught me this term of um, like the brands that are, was it planning to win versus planning not to lose, Karen. And that is a big difference. So, using nano and micro influencer marketing as a way of down the line creating that kind of tailwind from content and really what you get from actual influencer marketing, which is more of that awareness and general engagement, then you have to kind of be strategic earlier and a little bit more often as a brand if you want to try and create that by putting your brand out there with the right people and making sure that they're aware of that product, you know?
Yeah. I also take, I don't know if either of you saw this, but there was an amazing case study put out by a direct to consumer brand called Nerdy Nuts. And if you're not familiar with it, it's basically flavored peanut butter. They drop weekly flavors, kind of like Supreme drops exclusives. So they've created that kind of exclusive community where every single week, peanut butter lovers wait for the flavor to be dropped of the week, and there's very little of it, so there's more demand than there is product. But what was so amazing is that they have 20x their sales through TikTok. They used only 2 influencers from TikTok, and have created what they call the holy grail of a product feedback loop. Um, and you can find sort of their case study on the hustle, and there's been a lot of marketing discussion around it with marketers on LinkedIn. But just an amazing example of how you can use 2 influencers to drive so much product. Um, and I think that the feedback from the CEO was really that um, dealing with those TikTok influencers was uh, so great because these influencers are not used to having brands reach out to them yet. They're often everyday people that have a passion and a following, and they're really excited to work with brands, and they are able to get massive traction, click throughs, and therefore sales for brands and products, even small ones.
I'm curious, Cameron, from your perspective, as an influencer on so as someone if someone is an influencer on TikTok, is it harder to price yourself for different campaigns with brands because your content performance fluctuates so much because content is consumed through the For You page and not through your followers?
I mean, I think most brands consider working with TikTok influencers for the first time, at least, very experimental. They're not sure what to expect. And even if they've seen metrics, and even if the influencer comes with some sort of a history of working with brands, it's not always with their brand. So there's not really a firm ability to kind of forecast what that's going to look like. But I would say that, the experience that I've heard secondhand from marketers has been that if you look at platforms that are maybe more mature, like Instagram, where you have very established influencers, a lot of them have managers, they have rate cards, they have processes. Um, it's a lot harder to work with influencers, particularly if you're going to go above and beyond sort of a micro influencer. But on TikTok, it's sort of the Wild West. You can reach out directly. They're pretty responsive. A lot of times you're just giving them, free product and rev share, and they're very happy with that. And the kind of comparison results between established influencers on a platform like like Instagram, and then looking at TikTok, it's like night and day. Like the performance on TikTok has been really outstanding from what I can tell from most marketers.
Bringing that conversation together a little bit, I mean, thinking about the power that TikTok has then potentially right now over certain, pockets or generally the consumer market, it will be really interesting to see how far certain free product giveaways go, like literally product gifting come the holiday season this year because what might be just free product send outs to appropriate people that you've been keeping your eye on for the last several months really could have some long tail wins through the first half or quarter of next year where sales is pretty well typically it's like the off season for most consumer brands. So I I think Instagram as a platform, like you do your gifting, you're going to have your results, you're going to get your organic reach and engagement from those influencers. But I think, for TikTok, like you could have some serious wins that come out of, what was otherwise kind of a meaningless relationship to begin with. Uh, it's going to be pretty cool to keep an eye on.
Yeah, for sure. It feels a bit like the early days of YouTube and then the early days of Instagram, right? I'm sure there's going to be a window there where, you know, brands will take it over and ruin it for the influencers, the creators. But for today, I think it's an open canvas of creativity.
Yeah, well said. It definitely makes me think of YouTube quite a bit.
And Scott, you mentioned earlier briefly there a report that you were talking about. I think you said brands are 73% more likely to partner with influencers or something like that right now.
Yeah, I don't know if it's more likely. I think that generally it was talking about an increase in influencer spend found through a study, and I think it was over 3,500 people who actually responded to that to survey of sorts. But yeah, it was announced in several different articles that had come out over the past month. I forget who exactly had done the study, but we can include a little piece. I think generally it's really just speaking to again the rise of online media consumption right now, and really that people are looking to others for recommendations on not just kind of products and services, but more so like things to do and experiences, right? Like that's why I think the term engagement has been used a lot over the course of this conversation, but just in general, how you're hearing that word come up a lot. It doesn't just mean likes and comments. Like it's how can you actually engage people with an idea? So with a product or service, like what is the most likely channel to actually engage those ideal customers? And yeah, it's seeming like in many cases, it looks like 58% of marketers. So here it says 50% of marketers are considering working with influencers on YouTube, followed by 55% on Instagram, 35% on TikTok, 20% on Twitch, and 10% on Twitter. Or sorry, Twiller. So natural increase on pretty much all platforms right now. And yeah, don't think there's any signs of it stopping.
One thing from the report that caught my eye, though, was that 83%, or was it engaging talent across a wider channel mix, including out of home, which was it. Over 83% of marketers said that. Why do you think people are all still so gung ho about out of home?
It's a good question. I mean, Karen, what are your thoughts that come to mind?
Are you talking about billboards, like out of home media?
I believe so. The line from the report is 73% of marketers in the US and UK and Germany allocated more resources to influencer marketing in the last 12 months, engaging talent across a wider channel mix, including out of home at 83.3%.
Um, I'd have to go and look at it. I don't know. I mean, if we're talking billboards, one of the reasons why it might be still appealing is because billboards have actually done a really good job of essentially doing hyper local marketing and being able to key in on a very specific segment. Like they really digitize their networks and they can really target with digital billboards in a way that some platforms can't. And it was very surprising to me, but I'm not sure if, I'd have to see the study.
Yeah, and I mean, like just generally, not everything right is I guess digital, but it's how you amplify certain partnerships and like what may not have been mentioned directly in this study is what percentage of this spend increase actually distills down to like actual influencer marketing and looking more so and tiering that influencer spend and how much of that actually gets spent on celebrity sorts of marketing, right? As opposed to more so maybe the influencer kind of tier. But that being said, out of house stuff is still being used quite a bit. I mean, people are still having to drive. So when Karen was talking about billboards, like those are still getting seen very oftentimes. Maybe not as much, and I'm not sure how the price dictates that. But also looking a little strategically at like TV and radio. I mean, amplifying stuff through radio could be a great use right now because I think radio are actually still seeing decent numbers, and I'm not surprised considering people can have then that kind of you may not be going into work, but you have that normal kind of work feel of like turning on the radio and listening to Jim and Nancy talk about morning um, kind of happenings in your local neighborhood and stuff like that. Like I could see that going pretty far, and even generally like being a little strategic outside of it, like where are people spending their time when they're not at home, like grocery stores and the sort of routes that you're taking to get there, even, public transit, maybe not on the insides of it, but on the outsides of public transit. Those are still moving around, the buses and the trains, just like nothing else. So it's not like those routes have gone away, and it's not like they're not being seen either, right? Like we're not in um, a total lockdown where nobody can leave their house. So thankfully, anyways, at this point.
Mhm. I think another advantage to the billboards as well, and like I think placement, of course, is a factor. But sometimes if you work with an influencer on a billboard, like influencers, despite billboards being like the non-sexy version of marketing right now, influencers still look at it with like a form of nostalgia, and they're willing to share their own billboard once it's been, no, I don't know, not posted, once it's been created. Like I see it's really popular, I find, with musicians and stuff. Whenever they find like Spotify will feature them on a billboard in Times Square, and I'll see them get a photo of this billboard just to post it because they're excited that they're on a billboard that's in Times Square. But so you might get a little bit of extra amplification of that billboard on digital channels from the creator influencer that you're featuring on that billboard.
Yeah, I totally agree with that idea. I think that that would make it more authentic and kind of like more engaging from the influencer's audience standpoint. When you see that, oh man, like this is part of a billboard now. I actually know Rachel. Oh, why am I blanking on her last name? Rachel David, from Hashtag Communications, and she's also an investor in Trufan. She had one of the campaigns. I think she was doing for Rogers. I don't know. I forget which one it was, but I recall seeing how she amplified an influencer campaign that she was definitely brought on for and paid for, but on her own social pages after it was posted on a truck, like kind of less billboard, but more so like billboard style on the side of some truck or whatever. It's a big kind of image, and she was like standing beside it when they were, I guess, launching the campaign. And so, yeah, that sort of thing, kind of got people buzzing on LinkedIn and Instagram, just more like, oh, congratulations, like, super big deal, and has a bit of that kind of extra flair, like you were talking about. I don't know.
Rappers.
Yeah.
If we talk a little bit about sort of, how consumer habits are changing as a result of, where we are as a society. One of the industries that I used to work in, had a lot of dependence on weddings, right? Worked in the jewelry industry, and there was a lot of dependence on engagements and weddings. And, put that on the list of things that we're not doing anymore, right? We're not going to weddings all summer. But people are still getting married. And if you look at how that whole wedding industry, which is a massive multi-billion-dollar industry, everything from, you know, wedding venues, honeymoons, destination weddings, jewelry, wedding gowns. It just goes on and on and on. Bachelor parties. All of that is happening in a digital way. And you guys are kind of at that age where you have a lot of friends who are probably getting married or thinking about getting married. Have you seen any trends in that?
I haven't. Yeah, not a ton on my end. I don't have a ton of friends getting married right now.
How about you, Scott?
I mean, I would say same as Jacob. I definitely have a few more friends getting married these days, but not so much recently. I mean, I've seen some like interesting marriage things happening, but yeah, nothing like first witness comes to mind. And like a lot of friends have pushed off their weddings, I think, that were planned for the past summer. And so there's been that kind of aspect. But I mean, s- I saw this one thing really comes to mind when you were talking about weddings and like the current way of the world right now. There was this show, I guess, that recently came out on Netflix talking about quarantine and stay at home effects and stuff. Anyways, it goes through these little mini stories of people going through like their own little kind of stay at home issues. And one like family is having a funeral, unfortunately, but it like, what are those businesses doing for like weddings and stuff like that? How have they adapted right now? Because like for the funeral side of things, like in this TV show, the person who was working the funeral home just was like at the end of when their thing ended, just like moved somebody's picture and then moved a new picture in. Like of course they're not probably touching um, a lot of the actual corpses and stuff like that. Like how are the virtual weddings working? Is
Yeah,
Is
I
that
mean, I think
something that you've seen much of? I don't know.
it is. I mean, maybe it's just because it's on my radar because of, sort of previous brand involvement, but I'm seeing sort of the micro weddings happening where you're seeing literally, you might have seen like, at least 50 plus guests. Now you're seeing just a couple and if maybe a witness and somebody's marrying them. In some cases, online weddings are happening. And it's being streamed, to guests that are having to stay at home. But when you think about it, the cost of your average wedding, um, that's a good thing, I think, for couples because now they can just get married and focus on their actual, relationship versus putting out the cost of that huge ceremony.
I
Um,
agree.
yeah,
Amen
and
to that.
having babies and like all of the big life moments, like buying a house, and I think all of these things are massively changing as a result of where we are.
Yeah, you said it.
But changing gears here a little bit, I guess we're going from, as correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure wife in French is mon chéri or something like that. And I want to talk about a social platform called Chéri. Um, that was a terrible attempt at a segue, but we're going to roll with it. And my next story here is actually about a former GM at TikTok that decided to leave TikTok to start her own startup. And she launched her own social platform. But what was unique about it was a very niche and targeted social network. So the platform is called Cherry or Cherry, however you want to pronounce it. And it's all around beauty products. So whether it be skincare, makeup, hair products, that is like the entire extent of this platform. And that's what the content is entirely about. According to her name's Kelly Chen, is who founded this company. The main goal of the app is to democratize beauty and build a virtual ecosystem for fans to come together and share unbiased information and collect free products. So this first came across my radar when my girlfriend actually got hit with an ad for it, and she joined the platform because she's really gotten into skincare recently as a as a because of TikTok. And so she ended up joining this platform, and I kind of poked around on it. She was just showing it to me how it works. It kind of has a UI similar to Pinterest, but it's not companies you don't follow. It's all companies and brands and creators that you follow. And it's just entirely that. It's all about, like, her feed is entirely curated to be just skincare products. But if it was makeup, you could do just makeup, combination of both. In this app, from the article I sent over earlier, they had 50,000 downloads in the first few months with no marketing efforts. Um, and so I'm just curious, like, this is conversations I've had previously on this podcast with different guests, is seeing a rise of niche social media platforms coming in the future. And I'm curious if that's something you agree with, if you think we're going to start to see kind of all these social networks break into smaller platforms that we're going to start to see, whether it be like this one for beauty, but maybe we see one specifically for sports or one for gaming. Like, do you think we're going to start to see more and more specific social platforms coming?
I can definitely see that happening in the future. I mean, I don't really know what the future is going to hold for the social media platforms of current and TikTok, Instagram, and all those of the world, but they'll be around for a little while to come. Facebook's not going anywhere, and Google's not going anywhere. Uh, I do think that what I've heard from brands is they're really aware that there's not a ton of organic value, and at least what is there is not growing by the seeming well by the results that they're getting. They're seeing a diminishing return on organic content spend. And so what I mean by that is, like, the engagement rate for Instagram is going down. The organic engagement rate of TikTok is relatively low already, considering how fast you can build an audience. And, you know, it makes it difficult for one to spend on those types of people as a marketing channel and like a promotional route, because you're not certain that something is going to perform just even in the same way that something else has previously as a result of slightly different messaging, slightly different creative. It really could be the exact same both in just a different time. So thinking about that and like hearing the feedback that I've got um, from some of those brand marketers about that slow organic death that Instagram and others are dying, it definitely opens the door for people to start looking at more industry specific platforms that generate more for the users who have an interest in that industry or that particular product niche, and that generates more for the brands who want to get involved from a side of sponsorship, um, partnerships, and things like that. Because I think it also promotes a little bit of an advantage for the influencers that are creating the best content for those niches, since they'll get noticed quickly and be able to kind of present themselves as the subject matter experts that they are across the different social platforms, where they can own a little bit less of that niche audience.
I think that I was really happy to see this, initiative from the former GM of TikTok, because I feel like, that was kind of a gap that I haven't seen too much of that happening from other platforms like Instagram. I'd like to see these kind of industry specific apps or platforms really rise as a result of those communities. So I hope we see more of it.
Mhm. I was talking with Troy Osnoff on this podcast. We were talking about how back like pre MySpace, like in the early 2000s, the internet was very segregated, for lack of a better word, where everyone was going to different individual sites to find the content, the blogs that was they were looking for. And then social media kind of brought the internet together. And as the cycle goes around, we're going to start to see the internet kind of separate again into these micro social sites. And I know even like The Hustle, Karen, you mentioned them earlier. I saw a tweet from their founder saying that they were planning on starting their own LinkedIn, but without the fluff, I think is how he described it. And they were going to charge money for it. It's going to be $10 a month. So it's going to be interesting to watch the space and see if we get more players into here. I know like we're kind of already seeing a bit of a case study of it with all these specific Facebook groups, but it would essentially be taking those groups into creating their own social network. But I just want to check in with either of you if there's anything else either of you want to talk about before we wrap things up.
I mean, Scott, you wanted to talk about the Borat movie.
How could we not talk about Borat after that just came out and blew up the airwaves? No, I thought it was from an influencer standpoint. I thought he really somehow got out there and got on the ground, and people like David Dobrik, he tapped into that YouTube community that really I think tends to associate well with that kind of funny, slightly edgy, and just good for kind of a laugh and some pure enjoyment video watching. And yeah, David Dobrik, whenever you're tapping into that guy's audience, I think you've taken the right sort of approach. But I'm not sure if anybody who's listening to this or still listening to this will have had the chance to watch the YouTube video that he released where he introduced Borat to his best friends. But it's pretty funny, and it's just like it's such an organic way to do your influencer marketing, because of course Borat has his own presence. But each of those influencers, were able to kind of make the video I think that they wanted to make and that experience that they wanted to create. So it's pretty cool.
I had one other thing to throw out. I wanted to ask you guys, what is the first online video or influencer you remember seeing?
Great question.
I don't know. I don't know if this is the first one, but the early one that comes to mind, I can remember watching Dude Perfect videos like way back, not realizing who these guys were. Like it was just these YouTube videos my friends and I used to watch as like children. But Dude Perfect might be one of the early ones that I can remember watching.
Yeah, my sort of earliest memories, I was trying to think back on digital media, but I guess more thinking about influencer marketing as a whole and like what media I was reading and how I was being influenced by like people within pop culture. It's probably skateboarding. Like I think that was an industry and particularly like a sport that used influencers plus publications, like Thrashers of the world and stuff, but influencers to really speak to the crowd that they wanted to speak to as brands and be that voice. And so, yeah, I mean, I felt heavily influenced by some of those people growing up, and definitely, my mom, who was probably trailing me into stores and paying for things that we would walk out, could say that I was also buying a lot of the things or wanting to purchase some of the things that they may have been wearing. So, I guess that's it for me.
As a marketer, I was heavily influenced by some of the early videos I saw on the internet. And then I guess, just the democratization of being able to be a creator and the democratization of things like music distribution, which, Napster days at the time was so locked down, right? But the ability to just go to a website and download any song that you wanted to. And I'm talking like even stuff that in your childhood you saw somebody play live, was just crazy. And like the first video I remember seeing that was really impactful to me was called, and it was on Netscape, you can believe it, was called Pyrotechnics with Pop-Tarts. And it was a university frat house, I want to say somewhere out of London, that was literally jamming Pop-Tarts down into a toaster, and then they kind of explode out of the toaster. And I remember seeing that and thinking, wow, that would be a great commercial for Pop-Tarts. And that really, truly inspired me. So as crazy as that is, that was kind of the beginning of my digital marketing influence. But when I talk to people, it's fascinating to me what their first exposures have been.
One interesting thing, kind of as Scott was talking about skateboarding, there got me thinking. One of my favorite games of all time is Tony Hawk Underground 1. And what that game did a really good job of, which we'll probably start to see more and more now today, but they had like product placement in the game. Like you could pick your different skateboarding brands to put on your character in that game, and it was like the actual brands you could go and buy in real life. And I just think that was in the early 2000s, like 2002 or something when that game came out. So it's like I think we're going to start to see that more and more today, but like they were just so ahead of their time back then.
Still being influenced by those guys today. Like I actually asked for that remake of Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 that just came out as like the gift for my girlfriend for my upcoming birthday. But yeah, they did a legendary job at kind of like creating such an authentic feel for anybody in that industry. I mean, the skaters and the athletes did a great job themselves, like being themselves. But I think brands just were able to capture such a unique kind of culture, and develop that still existent to this day.
Love it.
100%. But I know we're getting close here to the wrap, to the hour mark. So I'm just going to thank you both for taking the time to be on the podcast. I want to give you both the floor. Where can the people find you? Plug anything and everything you got right now.
Well, you can find me, Bond Jane Bond, on both Twitter and Instagram, or Karen O'Brien on LinkedIn. Scott?
Go find Karen on LinkedIn. Don't find me. You want to follow her. Yeah, you can find me with Scott Birdie on LinkedIn or Twitter. But yeah, looking forward to this sucker coming out. And thanks for sharing another episode, guys.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I want to thank you guys once again for taking the time to be on the podcast. And I want to thank everybody for listening, whether you've listened the entire way through, if you only listen to bits and pieces. I really appreciate you taking the time to check this out. Everyone do me a big favor. Go and follow Scott and Karen. I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below. I will also have links to all of the articles discussed in the show notes as well. If you'd like to follow me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at the Jacob Kelly. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to leave a positive rating and review. It really helps people find this podcast and grow the community that we're developing here. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon.